Yeah, so without further ado, we'll get started. So thanks very much to our speakers today. So we've got three researchers from different departments across the university, which is really great. So they're going to talk about a project that they're working on that aims to explore the effects of climate change on mental health via effects on crop yield and food insecurity, specifically in Uganda and South Africa. So we're very pleased to welcome Mary Zhang, who is a senior research associate in the School for Policy Studies, and she researches the impact of poverty and social exclusion on the mental and physical health of individuals in lower middle income countries. And she's also joined by Sophie Rogers and Ahmed Mohamed. And Sophie recently finished her undergrad in geography, and she's interested in analysing future climates and the likely impact on human health. And Ahmed is a PhD student in civil engineering, and his research is on forecasting rainfall and floods and the impact of climate change on crop yields. So thanks very much to all three of you, and I'll pass over to you, Mary, to kick us off.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for the very nice introduction and for having us here today. As said, my name is Mary Zhang. I'm a senior research associate from the Bristol Poverty Institute. And today I have the honor of presenting together with my excellent colleagues, Sophie and Ahmed, on the topic of the mental health toll of food insecurity due to climate change. So what we're sharing here today is based on a project funded by the Capital Institute for the Environment, as well as the Elizabeth Blackwell Institute for Health Research through the University of Bristol Vice Chancellor Research Strategic Research Investment Fund. And this is a collaborative project between researchers from multiple disciplines, including geographic science, civil engineering, psychology, and social and public policy. This is a short-term project and it is mainly exploratory. It aims to test a theoretical model as illustrated here on the right side. So the model proposed that climate change as a hazard will affect the crop yield, and then both will show impact on food insecurity, which serves as a mediator in this model, and in turn will affect people's mental health, especially if the individuals are in vulnerable or disadvantaged situations. We use different sources of data in South Africa and Uganda to test this theoretical model. There are three research questions we try to investigate. Firstly, whether the climate change and crop yield models can produce reliable estimates to link with the food insecurity and mental health models. Secondly, because it is a complex and exploratory model that tries to integrate both the life science and social science. Each step in this logical chain is actually open for discussion and debate. Therefore, our second goal is to understand whether there are any significant knowledge gaps in each step of the theoretical model and what should be the direction for future exploration. Finally, because this model is tested using South African and Uganda data, we wish to learn whether there are any shared or unique variants between these two countries, and potentially whether this model can be implemented in the whole African continent or other parts of the world. So now I'm going to pass over to Sophie, who builds up the climate change models in South Africa and Uganda. Sophie, over to you, please.
Hi, so as Mary said, my role in this project alongside the rest of the climate team has to been to look at the climate data and kind of assess the trends and variability in past climate data. And then this is then fed to Ahmed, who kind of looks and sees how this is affecting crops. Sorry, please read to the, thank you. So the climate team and I decided to look at ERA 5 data, which is reanalysis data, and then therefore combines model data with observations, which was ideal for the analysis we were carrying out, because often African data across Africa is sometimes the observational data is quite sparse, and therefore by combining it with the model data, we can kind of build a better idea of what's going on. So the horizontal resolution is 0.25 degrees and the temporal resolution is monthly. Again, this was kind of acceptable for the analysis that we were carrying out, with the temporal coverage of 1961 to present, giving us a long enough kind of period to assess the changes and kind of build an idea of what's happening. So as well as the era 5 data, we also looked at CHEPS data. And this was because sometimes reanalysis data kind of has model and observational biases, which can kind of give an unreliable idea of what's going on. And therefore, by comparing it to the CHEPS data, we kind of assess where there might be issues with the models or observations. So CHEPS data combines real-time observing meteorological station data with infrared data. The resolution is slightly higher than the era 5 at 0.05 degrees, and the temporal resolution was monthly, which again kind of allowed us to make comparisons. The temporal coverage is slightly shorter, about 20 years than the era 5, but again, we can kind of still say that it's enough time to get an idea of what's going on. So the both data sets have kind of spanned from 50 degrees north to 50 degrees south. So therefore, we cropped them down to South Africa, which you can see on the left, and Uganda on the right. Although the boundaries, as you can see, are larger than the country, because it's kind of, for this study that we were doing, it was kind of acceptable. You can still see what's going on. If we were to kind of go into more detail, we would probably crop it to just the country, obviously remove the ocean. But for this study, it was enough to kind of build an idea. So looking at other data and kind of just getting to know the climate a bit across the two countries, we can kind of see that there was quite a lot of variation across South Africa. And therefore, to kind of go into the details a bit more and see what's happening, we chose to divide it into 3 regions, which you can see on this map here, with the east, northwest, and southwest, and therefore kind of see what's happening and how this would affect the crops as well. So one of the benefits of reanalysis data is there's often quite a lot of variables that we can analyze and choose to assess. So the climate team and I, and speaking with Ahmed, we kind of chose to refine it down to these 7 variables. So we had temperature, precipitation, wind speed, evaporation, potential evaporation, relative humidity, and solar radiation. Although there's quite a lot there, we kind of chose to mainly focus on temperature and precipitation as the 2 that would probably be most influential on the crop yields. So I'll now speak about the analysis that we did on them. So for each variable, we did the monthly, annual, and seasonal averages for South Africa and Uganda. That was for each variable, and that was for era 5. And we then looked at the region analysis for South Africa with era 5. And with the CHEPS data, it's only a precipitation data set, so therefore we just did the monthly, annual, and seasonal averages, and again, the regional averages for South Africa. So I'll now quickly go over the results that we found. So I'll go into more depth about temperature and precipitation. As I said, they were the ones that we kind of said would be probably the most influential on the crops. So here is the annual averages for both countries. Although, as I said, we did look at the monthly as well. The as you'd expect, there's quite a lot of fluctuations, and it was quite hard to kind of decipher the actual trends. So therefore, this is the annual graph. So for both, as you can see, that is an increase, a bit of a larger increase for Uganda compared to South Africa. And Uganda obviously does have a warmer climate, being close to the equator, and kind of having a more tropical climate, whereas South Africa, although the kind of eastern, northeastern areas are warmer, as you get to the western areas, it does get cooler. So we can see the general pattern there, and increasing as we would probably expect over this time period with the changing climate. So the looking at the seasonal, you can see obviously quite a lot of variation, especially for South Africa, which again, we would kind of expect this because the seasons are so varied, whereas Uganda, the seasons, although there is still variation, the change isn't quite as much between the two. But this is kind of useful to feed into the crops to assess like the growing seasons and the planting seasons and kind of see what will happen there. So again, the regional analysis for South Africa, you can see that there is quite a large difference actually with the temperature. With the southwest, as I said, being cooler, kind of getting the southwesterly winds quite and a cooler area of the country, where compared to the eastern areas. So again, useful to take into account when looking at the crops. Precipitation. So you can see that in general, Uganda does have quite a wet climate compared to South Africa. This is because it kind of has the quite a wet season between March and May with kind of torrential downpours, thunderstorms, whereas South Africa does tend to be quite a lot drier. You can actually see that there's not much change, although there's quite a lot of fluctuation. I calculated the 10-year averages between the start decade and the last decade, and you can actually see that there's minimal change between the two, although obviously the fluctuation needs to be taken into account. Whereas with Uganda, there's quite an evident decrease from the start decade and the last decade. And again, the seasonal, quite a lot of fluctuation, quite a lot of information on both of these. But you can kind of see that for South Africa, again, there's not masses of change kind of between the start and the end, whereas for each season with Uganda, there is quite a general decreasing trend. And for the regional analysis, the eastern side is quite a lot wetter than the western side, which, as I said, you kind of do expect this with kind of like the with the weather conditions and the climate conditions known to these parts of the country. So now comparing the precipitation data with ERA 5 and chirps. So this is kind of showing that there is variation between the two, although the patterns kind of do follow the same trend. More so for South Africa and Uganda, there is still a difference between the two. So the South African, there's kind of minimal difference between the start decades and the last decades for both ERA 5 and chirps, although ERA 5 is kind of slightly predicting more rainfall, but this is possibly because of the fact the ocean wasn't removed from the data, and therefore kind of could be causing some of those issues. Whereas with Uganda, there's actually kind of a difference between the start decade and the last decade, with ERA 5 showing a general decrease, whereas chirps data shows a general increase. But kind of looking into this, it's possibly because of the reanalysis data can often kind of under-predict extreme weather precipitation events, and therefore explains why the chirps is predicting higher precipitation. So I'll quickly go over the last few variables. As I said, we didn't go into much detail, but it's just kind of enough to build an idea of what's going on. So wind speed, as you can see, South Africa is there's quite a lot more wind, which you would expect with kind of the coastal areas and strong southwesterly winds. And they're also quite susceptible to extratropical cyclones. Whereas Uganda, kind of more, obviously more inland, more sheltered, and not quite as much wind there. Looking at the changes over time, there is kind of minimal changes, although wind is quite a hard variable to predict and kind of susceptible to biases within models and things, so possibly something that needs to be looked at in more depth. Evaporation, again, not much difference between the start decade and the last decade for both countries, although more evaporation is evident in Uganda, again, possibly due to the higher temperatures and kind of the limiting factors on evaporation. And also, I haven't put the potential evaporation graphs on, but there was appeared to be no difference between the start and the end decade, and it kind of had the same for the two countries. But this is probably another variable that does need to be looked at more, especially given the biases with kind of evaporation and, as I said, the hydrological variables within reanalysis data. Solar radiation, quite a strange one to model, but it's kind of useful and to then feed into the crop models. As you can see, Uganda, quite a lot more solar radiation, what you would expect being close to the equator and things. Beta reduction in each, but more kind of analysis needs to happen with these variables, as I said, just to kind of actually see what's happening and how it can affect the crops. Relative humidity. So Uganda, again, is quite a lot higher than South Africa, and you can see a decrease for both. So that's just a kind of a idea of what's going on with the different climate variables and how they how they have changed over time, and this can help kind of see and relate it to how the crops have changed over time and see the patterns between the two. Obviously, given kind of the short time scale of the project, there's more work that could be done to improve the reliability of the data we've looked at and things. As I said, there are kind of drawbacks of reanalysis. It was useful for this project and enabled us to see the trends over Africa, but possibly more data sets need to be analysed to kind of see what's happening more, assess the reliability of the data and compare them. And also, although, as I did say, we looked at the regional analysis for South Africa, there's still kind of lots of spatial variability depending on where the crops are growing and different things like that. So probably more spatial analysis needs to be undertaken for both countries. I'll now hand over to Ahmed, who will speak about the crop yield analysis.
Hello, everyone. In this section, I will talk about the crop yield in both Uganda and South Africa. The objectives of this task is to do a literature review to determine the main food crops in Uganda and South Africa and study different methods have been used before in crop yield prediction to investigate the historical changes of crop yield in Uganda and South Africa, and using machine learning algorithms to predict crop yield. Also determine the most important climatic variable in crop yield prediction. I will start by an overview of the study areas, determining the main food crops, investigate the previous methods, construction of a model by machine learning, then calibrating, validating, testing the model, and try to determine the knowledge gaps in the crop yield predictions. Study areas and main crops. This map shows the location of Uganda and South Africa. We can see that Uganda is a part of the East African region in the green color, while South Africa is the southernmost country in Africa in the yellow color. Uganda has four major distinct regions: northern, eastern, western, central. Kampala is the capital of Uganda. The population is about 47 million. So the population rate is 3.32%. Regarding the land cover in Uganda, Uganda has an area of 244 square meter. 45,000 square meter are open water and woodlands, while 196,000 kilometers is land. In the figure of percentage share of land cover type, we can see that 44% of the land is agriculture in Uganda. Also, if we look at this map, we can see the distribution of different land covers in Uganda, we can see that the light blue color show the distribution of croplands in Uganda. Also, if we look at the lower diagram, we can see the historical change in the arable lands in Uganda. We can see that there is an increase in the agriculture lands through time in Uganda. The major crops in Uganda are represented by plantains, maize, cassava, also other important crops such as sweet potatoes, sorghum, rice, beans, soya beans. When we look at the historical changes in crop yield in Uganda, we can see that some crops have experienced an increase in the yield through different years, such as maize, rice, sunflower seeds, and other crops have experienced a decrease in the yield through years, such as soybeans, wheat, cassava. This figure compared between the historical changes in the production and the harvested area, we can see there is a similar change between the production and the harvested area for each crop. For each crop. So when we are going to construct our models, we can't use the data of crop production. Otherwise, we have to use the data of crop yield to exclude the effect of the area. South Africa. South Africa has 9 provinces. The area is about 1,200,000 square meters. The capital is Pretoria. The population is about 60 million. The population rate is 1.33%. This map shows the distribution of different land covers in South Africa. We can see that the distribution of crops or croplands are represented by the brown color. Next. Regarding the major crops in South Africa, maize and wheat are the most important major crops in South Africa. There are also other crops such as barley, sorghum, and dry beans. This figure shows also a comparison between the crop productions and the harvested area for each crop in South Africa. Also, there is a similar change between the crop productions and the harvested area. So in South Africa also we have used the data of crop yield, not the data of crop production. This is the historical changes in crop yield values of different crops in South Africa. Most of the crops have experienced a significant increase in the yield through different years. Data required to construct the model of crop yield prediction are historical climate data of precipitation, minimum, maximum, and average temperature, solar radiation, relative humidity, and wind speed, projected climate data, and historical data of climate yield. The output will be the predicted crop yield data. We have used different climatic variables through the period of 1960 to 2019, and the same years for the crop yield to predict the yield of different crops in both countries. We started by doing some statistics to investigate different characteristics of the data, the descriptive analysis of climate and crop yields in Uganda and South Africa. For example, if we look at the minimum and maximum values of precipitation, we can in Uganda we can find that the minimum value of precipitation is 3.6 and the maximum value is 6.9. So there is an increase by about 3 millimeter in precipitation. Also, if we look at the temperature, there is an increase about 3 degrees in temperature. If we look at the South Africa, the precipitation has been increased from 0.9 to 1.9. Also, the temperature has been increased from 17.8 to 20.2. If we look at the crop yield values of all of the crops in both countries, we can see that all of the values have been increased through the different years. Next. This figure compared between the historical changes of the yield of different crops, and we can see the increase and the different fluctuations of different crops. Also, this figure shows the yield of different crops in Uganda and the fluctuation through different years. This is the scatter matrix of data in Uganda. The scatter matrix to show the relationship between different parameters, different variables that have been used as an input to the model to determine the relationship, the linear or non-linear relationship between data. We can see that some of the variables have linear relationship with other variables, but most of the variables show a non-linear relationship, and the distribution is not normal distribution. Next. Also, the scatter matrix of South Africa show that nearly all of the variables show a non-linear relationship between each other. So when we go to construct the model, the better algorithm that we should use is a non-linear algorithm to construct the model. This shows the correlations between data by two types of correlation: Pearson correlation, which find if there is a linear relationship between different data variables, and Spearman correlation, which find if there is a linear or non-linear relationship between data. As most of our data have a non-linear relationship, so the Spearman correlation will be more accurate. Spearman correlations of the data show that the temperature is the more correlated climatic variable with crop yield. Methods are used for crop yield. There are different methods have been used for in crop yield prediction, such as physical crop models, remote sensing, machine learning, deep learning, and combination of different models. In this project, we have used machine learning to predict the crops. Different machine learning algorithms have been used in the model construction, such as linear regression algorithm, decision tree regressor, random forest regressor, adapose regressor, gradient boosting regressor, and to try to find the best machine learning algorithms can be used in the crop yield prediction. Model training. Data has been classified into two sets: training data, which represents 80% of the data, testing data that represent 20% of the data. The model have been run by different machine learning algorithms to give the best predictions and show the best algorithm for crop yield predictions. The model have been evaluated by different metrics such as root mean square error and R-square. This is the results of performance of each machine learning algorithm, we can see that model 3, the random forest regressor algorithm, gives out the most better accuracy. The accuracy is about 85%. This figure shows a comparison between the predicted crops and the actual crop yields. We can see all of the points are close to each other, which show a good performance of the model. This is to calculate the future importance of different variables have been used as an input to the model. We can see that the temperature, particularly the minimum temperature and maximum temperature, are the most climatic variables that can affect the crop yield production. Findings, knowledge gaps, and next work. Temperature from this work, we can find that temperature is the most important climatic variable, and it has a high effect in crop yield in both countries. Random forest regressor is the best machine learning algorithm that can be used in crop prediction. Using climatic variables are not enough actually to forecast the future crop yield. Other variables should be used, such as pesticides, soil data, and other physical parameters. This work doesn't show the spatial variability of crop yield in each country. Therefore, spatial climate data and spatial crop yield data should be used. And this is because there is a high spatial variability in the climate in each country. Also, remote sensing data should be used, such as the normalized difference vegetation index, which show the spatial variability of crop yield data, and this can increase the accuracy of the prediction. Using deep learning algorithms, besides the machine learning algorithms, can enhance the performance of the model and the predictions because of their ability to model the complex nonlinear patterns in the data. Integration of other models, such as physical crop models that can incorporate different physical parameters of the crops with black box models, such as machine learning, can increase the accuracy of the crop yield. And we can do a comparison between their limitations and advantages. Next, we are going to do a long-term projection of climate and study the effect of the future of the climate, the projection on the projections of crop yield in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophie and Ahmed. So now I would like to share the food insecurity and the mental health part of this theoretical model. So for the mediator, that is food insecurity, and the final outcome of the proposed model, we use data from the Gallup World Pool. Gallup is a consulting company located in Washington, D.C., and it collaborates with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization to measure food insecurity all around the world. So the food insecurity is measured by 8 items with yes/no responses according to the level of severity. For example, as you can see here, the situation described by question 8 is a more severe situation compared with the situation described by question 1. And in terms of mental health, it is measured by 5 yes/no questions about the emotions a person experienced the day before the survey was conducted. And because apart from the first one, enjoyment, all the other 4 emotions are negative, we need to reversely code those responses. In each country, 1,000 people answered mental health questions. And when we plot the proportion of the yes responses to the 8 food insecurity questions, we can find that they share a similar tendency, that there was a slightly drop from 2014 to 2015, but thereafter the level of food insecurity gradually increases again. And despite that, both countries, both South Africa and Uganda, share the similar tendency. South Africa seems to outperform Uganda because it has a lower level of food insecurity across years. And if we talk about mental health questions, we found that there was a slight increase in the well-being between 2014 and 15, and then it decreases slightly from 2015 and thereafter. And again, despite that both countries share a similar pattern, South Africa outperformed Uganda. If we average the 8 food insecurity questions to create a total food insecurity score, it will range from the number 1 to 8. And the higher the score is, the more food insecurity people feel. And similarly, if we average the 5 emotion items to create a total score of mental health, it ranges from 1 to 5, with high scores indicating a high level of mental well-being. And consistent with what we have seen before in South African year 2015 seems to be better off when people reported the lowest level of food insecurity, but the highest level of mental health. And there are also noticeable regional variations that people in the Northeast and Southwest seem to have had better conditions than people in other parts of the country. When we conduct the same analysis for Uganda, we probably can draw the same conclusion that there seems to be some association between the level of food insecurity and mental health. And again, there are noticeable regional variations. To summarize our findings so far, it seems that we can get meaningful associations between climate change and crop yield models. And likewise, we can get reasonable association between food insecurity and mental health. However, can we not link the huge gap between life and social science? I think the answer is not straightforward because there are several challenges. First of all, the climate change and crop yield data are longitudinal, which can be tracked back to 1916s, whereas the food insecurity and mental health data can only provide 4 years of information. And secondly, the climate change and crop yield data are at the micro level that they can provide rich details of small regions, whereas the food insecurity and mental health data cannot go beyond the general administrative regions. Therefore, in order to map in the climate and crop yield data, we probably need to aggregate them to a high level. But during this process, meaningful patterns and information might be lost or become misleading. And finally, both the food insecurity and mental health measures are subjective. There should be better proxies of both concepts, and there might be other confounding variables that affect some of the variables tested by this model. So I think one of the main conclusions drawn from this exploratory project is that in order to answer the research questions we mentioned at the beginning, better quantity social science data to match the life science data are in pressing need. And this will be guiding our future exploration. So thank you very much for listening to our presentation today. We look forward to have more discussions with you in the following session. And we look forward to learning your comments and suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mary. That was really good. And thanks very much to Sophie and Ahmed as well. Do we have any questions? You can pop them in the chat, or you can, I think, put your hands up and we can unmute you. I have a really broad question whilst people are thinking. So you sort of touched on it at the end there, but it's really nice to see this kind of interdisciplinary research and like working together across so many sort of quite seemingly disparate fields. And I just wondered what you see as the kind of major challenges to that, in terms of I guess kind of talking with the same like vocabulary, but also access to data and talking about different methods and things.
I think if I may start, and then Sophie and Ahmed, please correct me and add your thoughts, please. I feel this is a very interesting project, and this is certainly most of us in the team feel that it's the first time for life scientists and social scientists to build up a conversation together on such an important topic, because both climate change and mental health and food insecurity are very, very important. And especially recently, there are some studies publishing that, extreme climate change may cause the increase of suicide rate in some countries, which is very unfortunate. So we feel that it is a very meaningful thing to build up this joint conversation together. And that was one of the motivations for the whole team to work on this project from the beginning. And so far, I would say that this project and the theoretical model we try to test is still meaningful, like it is promising, because at least we build up some meaningful links between crop yield and climate change and food insecurity and mental health. So I think the biggest challenge is that can we really meaningfully see that, the science part directly has the causal relationship to the social science part. Maybe we are ignoring some very critical steps in between, and this model is oversimplified. For example, Brazil is a country that is very capable of producing different types of plants, but unfortunately, from some previous studies, we find that people in that country feel that the food is still insecure, like they worry about the food supply all the time. So it might be because of the business models, the food supply chain, or the political issues there. It's just one example. So we think that if we try to just directly put the link in between, it is probably oversimplified. So that's one of the kind of huge research gaps we identified. Like, maybe our logic chain should be even more complex than the one we are sharing here today. That's one challenge. And the second challenge is really come to the concrete data analysis level. Like I said before, when we talk to the climate and crop yield expertise, they have this very rich longitudinal data, that can show you the seasonal changes or monthly changes. But for us social scientists, we don't have the luxury to so frequently collect people's mental health data. So I think how to meaningfully combining those issues, those data would be a very huge challenge. And currently, to be honest, the whole team does not have a straightforward answer. But we hope that in the future, we can collaborate with FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organizations, or some other international organizations or local governments. So with the hope that we can have more regular data collection about the social science mental health part. For example, we can ask people to use mobile phone apps to track their mental health daily. And in that sense, we can really have the comparable level of data to match with the science part. But I feel that's a second biggest challenge when we are running this project. And of course, that's why we're here today. We wish to learn from all the colleagues. And if you have any ideas, suggestions, please share with us, because that's going to be a very valuable exploration for the future. And Sophie, Ahmed, please add your thoughts.
I think you covered pretty much all of it. I think, like you say, one of the main issues is kind of the compatibility of the data between the different disciplines. That's something that could be improved and kind of worked on. But at the moment, the study kind of gives like a general overview where you kind of decipher some patterns. But I think that is probably one of the main limitations. But like you say, I think it is so important that different disciplines do come together, because obviously there are kind of like very likely and obviously some links between kind of like mental health and crops and lots of different aspects of different disciplines. And sometimes you can kind of it's not recognized, these things, you kind of just assume they're there, but without actually doing research and kind of studies into them, it's quite hard to actually say what's going on and see patterns and things. So I think making more the data more compatible, I think it would be a really interesting thing to kind of go into more depth.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Mary. I think regarding the crop yield prediction, the most challenge is using other parameters, because most of the researchers are using climate data to build the models and study the effect of climate on the crop yield, but using the other parameters such as physical parameters regarding the type of plants, regarding the depth of groundwater, the type of soils. This will enhance and the prediction and will give us more accurate prediction. And we actually try to do this in the future. Also, as I said before, we have to use the spatial data to get the spatial distribution of climate, because the climates are very special. There is a high variability in climate in different locations in both countries. So especially distributed data for climate and crop yield will be more benefit and will give us more accurate predictions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's a question from Cynthia in the chat. Cynthia, if you're there and you fancy unmuting yourself, feel free to ask yourself. I think you should be able to unmute.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Sorry, that's a very wonderful presentation. I just wanted to find out if you had any reason in particular for selecting South Africa and Uganda for the study.
That's a great question. So thank you for joining us today. And so the reason we choose these countries is because they are both able to provide all the information we need. So they have very good and detailed weather change data. They have the detailed crop yield data, and they also have good quantity mental health and food insecurity data. So because these two countries can provide such information, that's one reason. And another reason was because both countries share some similarities, but both countries also have their unique features in many aspects. So as our next step, actually, we wish to build up some cross-country comparisons. And if those variants are meaningful, whether we can apply that to the whole African continent or whether we can apply that to other parts of the world, South Asia, Latin America, for instance. So I think that both countries can give us very promising insights into the future exploration. So that was the reason why we choose both countries.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question which was sort of following up on Joseph? Oh, sorry, Joseph. Joseph, do you have a question?
Oh, no, that's fine. Go
no,
ahead
you
first.
You go first. You go first.
Sure. Thanks. I'll put the hand down as well. I do have a technical question, which is a sort of an apology. I don't want to go in a technical route, but I'll ask that in a second. But just first of all, a comment really. So I've been lucky enough to sort of get involved a little bit in seeing this project progress. So I only joined the University of Bristol in April as one of a number of joint positions with the Met Office, which is where I am at the moment. But I think this the need for interdisciplinary research and this project really sets a good basis for future work. So I'm sort of really excited to see where it goes. But also beyond that, in kind of a transdisciplinary research, I think there's opportunities to link with, and you mentioned FAO, but other organisations within countries that are will see a huge amount of value from this kind of work to really understand the problems, but relating that lived experience in terms of mental health and relating it to the sort of the hard data that we have from the climate models and crop yield data, I think is a huge challenge, but one that we have to address. So just have a brief question around probably for Ahmed, which is I think you had a conclusion there was an association between temperature and crop yield, but I wonder whether that's a real association, because I mean they're both going up essentially, or have gone up over the last 60 years. But I wonder whether there's any actual causal link there, and whether if you detrend the crop yield data, do you see the year-to-year variability mapping with the temperature variability year on year? Because again, I suspect that over 60 years, you're seeing huge advances in abilities to increase yields for particular crops. So I just wondered if you've looked at that aspect as well.
Yes, it's a good question. Yeah, I have compared between the trends of different climatic variables and the trends of crop yield. Actually, I couldn't find a similar trend between the climate variables and the crop yield because there are other parameters we have to get to enhance the model performance and to get more accurate predictions and exclude their effect on the model predictions. And that's what are we going to do in the future.
Okay, thanks.
If you have to, I'm going to hop back to that question I had just because I'm interested by it. So it was a question, I guess, possibly between Ahmed and Sophie's work, but it's one of the things that we've found with doing some work. So we've worked with some folks who work with Dan Mitchell, like Sophie's supervisor in geography, and with Gulamon, who's on this call, and other colleagues. And one of the things that you find is that there's something you see in like spatial analysis, which is often like referred to as the modifiable areal unit problem, which is that basically like the spatial scale at which you define the thing you're looking at influences what you find in its likely effects on something. And I guess you can kind of think of, with temporal scale, you can think of a similar thing, right? There's not like an obvious frame of reference for what period of sustained temperature change might be necessarily impactful for crops of a given type or crops of a certain. I don't know anything about crop yields, right? But so like average monthly temperature may not be as important as, say, within month heterogeneity or within day heterogeneity or those kind of things. And I guess my question is, how is there a way of like meaningfully, other than I guess going and engaging with sort of like users of the crops themselves, is there a way of meaningfully unpicking which of those you think are going to be the sort of exposures of interest or the relevant exposures for crop yields? So that's a bit of a woolly question.
I think for the analysis that we were doing, we kind of we did look at the monthly, and then, as I said, we then calculated the annual to kind of see the trends more clearly. I think it's quite hard to decide which is the best one. Obviously, there's going to be benefits of and like disadvantages of using different scales. I think for what we were doing, it worked quite well to kind of do the yearly one, but then I don't know. As I said, the seasonal kind of analysis needed to come in as well, especially with crops and things. That's quite an important one to look at. I'm not sure if Ahmed has something to say or reasoning why.
I guess you can also think about if say, so one of the things we looked at is whether something like within area heterogeneity in climate data, especially if you have this mismatch of spatial resolution for your data, right? You've got sort of the social science outcomes are at a sort of coarser scale than your climate exposures. So if you think about looking at within area variability or something, then you can get information which are sort of aggregated up to the level of the social science outcomes, but have more information contained into them than you would necessarily just have with a sort of area level mean or that kind of thing. Is that a thing that maybe is worth exploring?
Yeah, no, I think it would be something worth exploring, especially with kind of the different spatial scales that we do have of each of the, especially of the Mary's data and compared to mine and Ahmed's data. So I think it would be something worth exploring it. But also there is like so much spatial variability, it would be hard to kind of pick the best one to do. Obviously, if you go so like into so much depth, it's kind of quite hard to say like a more general trend, and also it would be kind of quite a lengthy procedure. But I don't know, I guess finding like a balance between so much depth and enough to kind of give any pattern, I think it's something could possibly be looked at and kind of compared, but we haven't looked at that much of that, so I think it'd be hard to say at the moment which one would be the best one.
Yeah, I might drop you guys an email afterwards about that, because I think but from especially from like mental health perspectives and stuff like that, like inequality is usually quite important for stuff like that. So if you think about within area inequalities for a given spatial scale, then perhaps that could conceivably, not to sound like an horrible Marxist geographer or something, but you can think about like having less food is when you're capturing that, it's both the absolute level of having less food, but it's also the relative impact of having less food relative to those around you, and you're capturing some sort of combined effect of both if you're measuring mental health associated with it. And I think that's something which we spent a little while thinking about, so it might be useful to talk about that.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Can I just add something? So, sorry, I'm not an expert in climate. What I want to add is I'm thinking of the relationship between temperature and crop yields. Could it also be, if you look at other correlates like more sophisticated farm tools? Because South Africa, to me, seems to be a more developed country, or in Africa, in the sense of Africa, it seems to be more sophisticated than Uganda. So you can also associate some of the country level factors, the within country factors that can also increase crop yields, not necessarily from temperature or climate as such.
Cynthia, may I quickly ask a follow-up question based on what you said? So which factors you would like to recommend us to explore as the next step?
Like you look at the farmers, maybe the farmers are more, they use more sophisticated methods for farming. The income level, because farming also has to do with how much you put in. So they might have, the farmers may have more income to put into farming than others. I'm just saying that you can also explore other factors, not necessarily climate factors as responsible for the high crop yields in South Africa. When you're talking about disparities in countries.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, definitely. That's very valuable. Thank you.
It looks like Heike, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Heike has a question. Are you happy to unmute yourself?
Yes, no problem. Perfectly said, it's Heike. Yeah, so my question is whether you're considering food losses at all throughout the food system. I mean, yes, we have yield, but then a lot gets lost on farm and afterwards. And I was just wondering if you had paid any considerations to that. And then if we're looking at food insecurity of producers as well, for example, this network of food insecurity, losses, and mental health, that could also be something that is somewhat interwoven in all these relationships.
Yeah. So Sophie, Ahmed, would you like to address this?
I do think that was
Sophie, please.
Sorry, can you hear me? I do think the food losses, as you said, I don't think they were taken into account. I think it would be something interesting to look at. I think for this project, the short time scale, we did look at just the kind of more general idea, but that's definitely something I think that probably should be taken into account with more analysis. So that's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, because I feel, to be honest, the feeling of this whole project is that we discovered more issues than the answers we can provide, than the questions we can answer. So even this theoretical model seems to be very complex already, but we believe that, as we said at the beginning, probably each logic chain will involve many more confounding variables, and it is much more complex than we thought. So the issue you just mentioned is definitely one of the things we should explore, given that if available and higher quality data is there. Yeah, thank you.
So I was just going to ask Heike, when you talk about food loss, do you think of it as distinct to food waste? Because that's what I think of in my head when I think of food loss, and I don't know if that is a useful separation, or I'm just being stupid.
Yeah, so my PhD is about food waste in general. It depends on which definition you go with. So if we're talking about FAO definitions, then everything that happens from farm to retail and that is lost is food loss. Retail to household or consumption is food waste, but essentially it's the same thing. Essentially, it is food that has been produced that leaves the supply chain for whatever reason. For my thesis, I'm only using food waste for everything that happens from farm to fork.
That's really useful. Thank you.
It would be super useful if we can have a follow-up conversation after this meeting. That would be super great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess we've run slightly over time, so maybe it's useful to wrap up. But if you're happy, Heike, or whoever else, if you're happy to stick your email address in chat, or if Mary, if you're happy to leave an email address for you guys, then people can get in contact after the call, if that's all right. And I will stop recording because I should have. Yeah, that's the thing I can do.